It has been a while since we have done a wheel building video on the Map Deck channel, but today is a special day. We've got something very cool to show you. But first of all, you might be wondering why this bike has been sat in the back of all of our videos recently, waiting for an owner. Well, this poor rider has been waiting for these wheels to arrive, but it's worth the wait because we've got something pretty special. So these are the new Light Bicycle Falcon Turbo 50s, pretty new from this company. Now we've worked with Light Bicycle for a little while, probably ramped up that recently as we're really looking for good carbon rim suppliers to help us with wheel builds. We don't really tend to buy this stuff off the shelf as it is. We want to be able to inspect it, build it, give the customer exactly what they want. So this works for us. Now, shipping time, it does take like forever to order off Light Bicycle, but the product is pretty good for the price you get. Now, I've taken the boroscope to this and I'll show you the footage on screen now. What I've done is try to show you around the inside and you can see evidence of tenting in there where they've used an inflatable bag to get the compression on the inside. And I've also paid close attention to looking at where they've drilled the holes. One on the outside, you can see where it sort of had a 3-point drilling, I'd say. They drilled a small hole, then a bigger hole, and then they finish that hole off because the actual holes themselves look very nicely done. Where they drilled on the inside, I just want to make sure there's no tenting where the actual nipple's going to sit. So I've been around and checked a few just to make sure that's been finished nicely so that we've got a nice, good sort of interface between the nipple and the carbon rim. That looks good. On the outside, I mean, nearly every carbon wheel is excellent finish quality on the outside now. This is a bit like Campagnolo finishing, so you can still see, if you look closely, the strands of carbon, but it's behind this lovely gloss finish. If you're familiar with looking at like Shimals and that sort of thing, this will look quite familiar to you. The rim profile itself is what makes these sort of the most interesting. So these are 25 millimeters internal, absolutely massive, on a 34.5 millimeter external. So that's like 72.6% on the Jesse coil ratio. Pretty huge, and Light Bicycle say these are optimized for a 28 to 30, which seems narrow considering the width, but it'll go right there up to a 50. Now, these aren't gravel wheels or the all-road, they're definitely rated for road. And a big part of that is also this aerodynamic shape that they have. So they're taking a slightly different tack to Zip and Princeton with the wavy design. This one, they've got sort of cuts in, like a sort of serrated edge to them. It's really quite unique. I've not really seen a wheel that similar to this before. Looks absolutely stunning, looks very, very wide. You guys want to know the weight of a raw rim, 430 grams. Now, considering the width and the depth, that I think is pretty impressive. So what are we going to do to get these wheels built? Well, DT Swiss 180 hubs is what we're going for with this. So these are lovely and lightweight. The rear one there measures in at 191 grams. And I love these. They're so easy to work on as well because, you know, you can just change the adapters. If you're still running quick release, you can change these end caps. These use the EXP ratchet drive. So you have this ratchet drive here. This is solid, and it's just the one in the free hub that is on the spring to get you that ratchet drive. And these run all on the ceramic bearings as well. So absolutely beautifully simple, elegant design, works well and very, very easy to service. And then the front one there, just 95 grams. So we like DT Swiss here. Okay, there might be lighter stuff out there in the market, but in terms of durability, dependability, serviceability, I'm sorry, I just don't think you can beat these, because in a decade's time, you'll still be able to buy this axle, you'll still be able to buy that end cap, and that for me is worth a lot. To finish this build off, we are going for, of course, straight pull Sapim CX-Ray Spokes. Quick post-editing interruption here to add some more context to this. Spoke choice. Yes, it's very easy to always default to the Sapim CX-Rays, have an excellent reputation. It's not always the best choice. In fact, Sapim actually recently came out with a new spoke called the Sapim CX Sprint. And the whole purpose of that spoke is to add a little bit more rigidity into the spoke for sprinting. So if you're the sort of person that actually puts significant amount of power through their wheels and can make them flex, you might want to introduce a different type of spoke. Now, you can do that in several ways. One, you can just do it to the drive side. You might want to put it on the entire back wheel. You might want to do it to the entire wheel set. that's the beauty of custom building. Mavic famously did it throughout all their wheels. They used to make their own spokes, and I think they still do, to make sure they're getting the sort of compliance and rigidity that they want from a spoke. We will do things where we might put a standard round spoke on the drive side. The round spokes, you can see, are a lot more rigid, and even the round spokes come with different buttons. So it starts off at 2mm, maybe down to 1.8 here, and then 1.5 in the middle, and this gives your spoke a different flex characteristic as well. Choosing these will have quite a big impact on how your wheel set actually rides. Done all the spoke calculations, got them from Spokes by Ryan, thanks very much. And we are going for brass nipples. Now, I've got all these out because I want to show you the difference, because over here I've measured out 48 aluminium nipples. And when you're buying a super light wheel set like this, and you're deciding between price versus weight, this could literally be the thing that makes your decision. So 19 grams, but these will corrode and crack and fall apart so quickly compared to a set of brass nipples. And the reason they do that, on that nobilities of metal charts, these are far away from each other. So the opportunity to act like a battery, if you like, and you get that white sort of furry corrosion, is really, really high. Whereas brass, slightly different properties, but heavier. There you go, 45 grams, so more than double the weight for the same amount of metal, but relatively small amount of weight. But the thing is, a lot of you make your buying decision on what's the lightest weight wheel that I can get for the least amount of money. If it's down to like 20 odd grams, but that brings you down from like 1,300 and something to 1,200 and something grams, that's where your decisions are. So look out for that. If durability, dependability is important to you, 25 grams worth of extra brass, definitely worth carrying around in my opinion. Okay, we're gonna start this build process. I'll talk you through anything sort of interesting as we go. Let's clear this off and get these laced. With a lot of rims, it's quite subtle which way around the rims have been drilled, but with this, it's so wide, it's really, really obvious which direction it is. But I do like Light Bicycle do put your stickers on this side saying spoke direction. That's always for like the drive side. They also do it on the inside as well, but in this case, it is really, really obvious. Now, we are using straight pull. Here's the thing, if you're gonna build your own wheels at home, I would say if you're building it for the very first time, you don't really want to learn about lacing and all that sort of stuff. Start with straight pull, but if you're gonna do straight pull, get bladed spokes. That's probably the easiest way to build your own wheels. It's dead easy, and the way I'm gonna start it is just start lacing them up. All you're doing is literally just pushing this through. You have to go around in like a clockwise direction. I am not going to be interlacing these straight pulls. Some people do, some hubs demand that you do. These, the gap between the inner and the outer is so big that if you do interlace them, you end up with quite a big kink. So you'll end up with a kink here and a kink here. And that's too much of a bend in my mind, so I don't interlace. Okay. Straight pull interlacing. I almost felt a sharp intake of breath as you saw that bit in the video. Now go and have a look at some wheels in the bike shop that have straight pull, and you'll see it's not a clear-cut answer. This is a fast forward Riot built on 350 hubs, and on this one the disc side is interlaced but the non-disc side is not interlaced. Here is a black ink wheel where both sides are interlaced. Now this is a very narrow wheel. This is a somewhat wider wheel, and the ones that I've just built are probably the widest I've ever built. Now, when I had them on the table, I was experimenting with what they would look like when they were interlaced, and to me, it felt like they were going to go through too much of a sharp bend, and therefore I'd introduce what I'd call a stress riser as opposed to actually helping the rigidity. So I have chosen to go for a non-interlaced option on this. I might be wrong on that, I guess only time will tell. It's not very often that you see wheels that are this wide on a road bike. So if I'm wrong, I will let you know. Cool. So once you've got all that done, is you should be able to see where you've got this big gap here. You want to make sure that where the valve is going to be, that you can actually got a gap big enough that you can actually get the pump head on. That's going to go in these two holes. So we've got that sticker there to work on, and we're going to get these two spokes in first. All laced, 24 hole pattern, quick sanity check that where the valve hole is, you've definitely got a space for the valve. And these two spokes here give you plenty of room to get a pump on there. Right now, the wheel is still all loose and floppy like this. So what we need to do now is start building some tension into it bit by bit. So that means getting it into the truing stand. Before we do that, we do a little bit of truing stand prep. Okay, setting up the truing stand in, and if you start with good preparation, your wheel build will go well. Now, these Park Tool TS 2.2s, slightly old stand now, they've got several updated ones. This is just my tried and tested. I just prefer this one. I find the new one's a bit big. Center engaged, doesn't have to be the fancy Park one. You can get plenty of cheap ones. And what I want to do first of all is make sure that everything is set up, because you do have a tendency to drift over time. And with the center engage, it's very easy for this to walk out as well. So you can see here, it's just going to walk out. So when we set this up just so it's tight. I'm going to put some pressure on here and just nip that. And then I'm just going to bring these, make sure I've got a gap either side. Now, it doesn't need to be micron perfect right now, because we are going to use the proper DTIs later on to make sure we're absolutely perfect, and we've got the addition tool, but get it as close as you can. If it's not right, we'll then use the spanner to adjust all this. So I am confident this is all set up, so I don't need to be worrying too much about my dishing, even though we'll check that later. So we need to put some center lock hub adapters in the stand. Again, like, take your time here, make sure everything's lined up. It's too easy just to get these a little bit crooked. Just take your time and make sure this is all centered. Again, it's too easy to get this wrong. So look at that, all loose and floppy. So the very first thing I want to do is just start to gradually bring these spokes up to tension. The very first thing I'm going to do is just go around and make sure that all of the screw threads that I can see are hidden. This can actually be quite a long, laborious task, and it can be made quicker by a tool like this, but this is too deep for my 50mm rim here. That's one way round, and now we'll know that all of the spokes are at an equal length now, because everything's been brought up to the threads being completely level with the nipples. So the next thing I want to try and do is gradually build the tension in the whole wheel. So I'm going to start with what's going to become the tightest side, which is the drive side. I'm going to go around and add turn to every single one of those nipples, and then gradually build it up. At the same time, just keeping a close eye on the rough centering as we go. But at the moment, we can still do fairly big movements. So one turn on the drive side has pretty much built the whole wheel up to the point where I can now feel most of the spokes are now touching the rim. So it's brought most of the spokes under a little bit of tension, but I can tell there's just a couple around the rim that are just a little bit on the loose side. So these two here are pretty tight, but this one here is still rattling. So now I'm just going to go around and find those ones which are just rattling still and just bring them up by a turn. Now I'm at the point where as I start making an adjustment, I know it's actually going to be physically doing something to the true of the wheel. So now I start thinking about the 4 dimensions of true. One is the radial true, so that's how much up and down it's out, and that is going to be set by adjusting this and looking at this part of the rim here and where it is in relation to that. So that's going to give us our radial true. They need to be thinking about the dish, so the center line of the rim in line with the center line of the hub, unless you have Cannondale wheels on the asymmetric system. And then I want the lateral true as well, and that is the actual run out left and right. Not massively important with disc brakes, but we're still going to be aiming for 0.2mm on that. And then finally, the actual spoke tension. We need to make sure that all the spokes are up to the correct tension. I think in this case, the instructions from Light Bicycle are 120 kilograms of force up to 135 kilograms of force, which is quite a lot. And we want them all to be balanced within 5% of each other. So the very first thing I want to do is start working on those two, lateral and radial, and just doing quite broad strokes to get them roughly right first of all. And the way I like to think about it is just work with the biggest problem first. Find the biggest problem, correct the biggest problem, and then gradually your problems get smaller and smaller. Just going to find the point where we're making the biggest impact and start gradually bringing the rim into center and making sure that the hub stays center as well. So at this point, I now need to start thinking about keeping my spokes straight. So I'm going to use a little spoke holder, because now I want to make sure that my spokes aren't rotating as I make turns. So again, at this point, being sort of fairly, what I'd call aggressive. So might be doing a full turn, maybe even 2 full turns if I feel I need to. Later on, we'll get down to like 1/8 of a turn and like little nudges essentially. But right now, we can be making some fairly fairly big things. I know that I am well away from maximum tension. Awesome. So now I'm at the point where I spin the wheel and we're roughly in center. So I can start winding this in and just want to keep an eye on the up and down, so that radial true, and in this case fairly big egg shape. So I'm just going to see if I can take that out quickly. I'm going to do a combination of the point here where it starts getting tight. I'm going to make sure that all the spokes in this area are going to get like a little half a turn, and a bit over here where there's a big gap, I'm going to loosen them by about half a turn. So I'm within about a millimetre and a half now. So at this point now I want to start paying more attention to the lateral and just make sure that is true up to about a millimetre either side. So doesn't have to be massively good at the moment. And really what I'm doing most of the time here is just tightening, because I know that we are well under tension. So at this point here, I can start feeling that the spokes are starting to get in a little bit tighter, and now it's time to start using some lube so that the brass interface with this has got something to work against. So cool, now we're starting to look a bit more like a wheel. And in all honesty, you could probably put a tire on this and ride it fairly successfully, but we need to go to the nth degree on this because it has to be absolutely perfect. We are going to start looking at correcting the radial. I want to get them to at least 0.3, 0.4, if not better, and then the true, and then we'll start going and looking at our spoke tensions. These DTIs, they're a millimetre the whole way around. So if you see the needle go the whole way around the circle, it'll be a whole millimetre out. There we go, we've got a bit of a bullet there. Did you see that? Just here, look. So we're not a whole millimetre out, but we're about 0.7 or something. So let's see if we can get that down much closer to that 0.3-ish. So at some point we need a reference. So we're going to find what looks to be the middle and then just set the gauge. And then I can start working off where I think the high spots and low spots are. So well out of range here, but in what direction? So if I press down on this gauge, it's going to take it even further out, which means I want to go this way. So these ones need a little tighten. So we're up to about under half a millimetre anyway. That's good enough for now. What I can do is bring this back into place, and I want to spend a much more time on our lateral true, but I'm going to have these down, so if our radial starts to go out at any point, I can correct it as I go. And at about this point where I'm happy that the radial and the lateral and the dish are all within at least 0.5 millimetre, that's when I really start thinking about my spoke tensions. Now, a few ways of measuring this. One, you need to go to the rim manufacturer and make sure that you are at the specified tension. So Light Bicycle on their website say that for carbon rims on their road bike range needs to be between 120 and 135 kilograms of force. You get the same sort of information from Sapim for the Sapim X-Ray, and you also have the chart that comes with whatever tension gauge you're using. Now you can make or buy sort of tension gauges, if you like, to make sure these are all calibrated. In the working shop, we tend to find that we have half a dozen of these floating around at any one time. It's quite easy to tell if one goes out of true, so we just use the ones that are most consistent and then bring that one up. Like I say, we tend to replace them, probably buy at least one, maybe two a year, so they get rotated quite quickly. So if anything does go, we tend to recognize it. So I'm going to work on this one. Start at our valve hole. The tightest part of this is going to be the drive side, and currently this one's reading a reading of 10, and on our chart over here a reading of 10 gives us 74 kilograms of force. So we are way below tension. We are really looking for a reading really of 15 to 16, and what I'm looking for at the moment is consistency. Here there was one way under tension, so what I want to do is bring this one up to tension, and at this point, if I knew that these ones were over tension, I'd bring them down, but I know that these ones are also under tension, so what I'm going to do is use the non-drive side to bring the true back into line again and then retest. It's significantly easier to do all your tension balancing when they're relatively loose and then bring up the entire wheel up to the required tension than it is to have a few spokes higher than what you want and then having to come back down again. So try and get everything balanced and then equal it and equal and then bring it up to tension. So we're not perfect yet. We're probably within 2, maybe 3 marks on this gauge. on either side, but at this point here, I now want to start adding some tension and building the entire wheel up. So back to the valve hole, and I'm going to add a half turn to every single nipple. So that's the whole way around, half a turn. And now I know for a fact that my radial and lateral true will be all out of whack. It's not that bad, but we're just going to go back and do some trimming, bring everything back again. So right now I'm at the point where I'm really happy with the tension on the drive side. The non-drive side is still a little bit erratic with its tensions, and I'm just keeping an eye on my true here, and I've noticed that the radial's gone out ever so slightly. So from here on in, it's just going to be get your head down and just start correcting each problem a little bit at a time. Find the biggest problem, correct it. Find the biggest problem, correct it. But before I do that, I am just going to do a quick sanity check and do a de-stressing. Now, because these are a straight pull and they are bladed, therefore I know that the chance of any sort of spoke wind up is really negligible. Compared to a J-bend or a round spoke. I am just going to do a quick sanity check and put some weight on it and just de-stress the rim. All we're going to do is come down and you'll just hear that little ping, ping, ping. Shouldn't really do much at all. So virtually nothing happened there. One, a couple of good signs. We know that there's no like tenting on the inside of the rim, so those nipples are rotating freely. It is probably the easiest wheel to build if you are a beginner building with bladed straight pull, because you don't get that spoke wind up problem. Leave it with me, let's get my head down and we'll come back and you'll just rinse and repeat that whole process, going from half a turn down to a quarter of a turn to an eighth of a turn to the finest detail, until we'll come back and we'll do the very, very final true and make sure we're absolutely spot on. Okay, it is a fresh new day and I'll explain all this blue tissue on the table in a second. And we've got to the point where both wheels are fully built. Now, if you were to buy a set of wheels off the shelf, this is pretty much how they come. I've just weighed them. I'll put the weights up on the screen here, coming in at about 1380, 1390, something like that, without any rim tape, without any valves, and that sort of thing. I am really liking how these came together. Right now, these are built to probably what's considered to be an industry standard. So in dish, radial true, plus or minus 0.2 millimeters, the lateral true, plus or minus 0.2 millimeters, and the spoke tension is somewhere between 5% and 10% variance. The reason I'm being vague with that is because we are not done yet. This brings me on to sort of the art, if you like, of wheel building, is knowing when to stop, because at some point, an adjustment you will make the whole situation worse. Either you'll add a bit too much tension and you'll strip a nipple or something, or changes that you make become so subtle on one side of the wheel that when you go back and check the other, something else would have changed. So some point you've got to know enough's enough. I am not happy with this yet. I am going to do the final tension with a tyre on and inflated, because that will compress everything, and that's when I'll do my final checks. You don't always get that if you don't buy wheel and tyre combos together. So quite a lot of wheel builders, I think Percenti do it, I think Parkour do it. If you buy tyres at the same time, they will make sure that the final true intention is done with a tyre on. Which brings me on to all this blue paper, because before you fit a rim tape, you need to really make sure that it's pristinely clean. So this is almost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 passes of IPA, rubbing alcohol, and clean paper cloth. That is how dirty it comes from factory. Nothing is going to stick to that. And you keep going, and you keep going, and you keep going until your cloth runs completely clean, and then you put some tape on it. Another thing I like to do before I put all the tape on, and I'll show you the footage right now, is to use the boroscope or shine a light down here and just do a sanity check, just to make sure that your spoke is actually sitting in the middle of the nipple. Sometimes you've got your spoke calculations wrong. What you'll find is that the spoke can protrude. Now, a millimetre, maybe a little bit more than that is okay, but to be absolutely perfect, it's nice if the spoke sits completely flush with the head of the nipple. That way you've got maximum amount of thread engagement with the nipple. So the trick with this is to keep the tension on and keep this pressed into the drop channel. And you see, I'm actually pulling on this really quite hard, and I'm keeping my fingers here. I just like to cut the tape at a bit of an angle, because that helps you just pull out any air bubbles. So I'm using about 1 layer of tape, and I've probably overlapped it by about 6 inches or so. If you've got hookless rims, tubeless straight side, pay attention to the instructions. You'll find that a lot of tubeless hookless systems will ask you to put 2, maybe even 3 rounds of tape on it, because you need to adjust the fit to be at perfectly 6mm. They'll normally tell you, but it's also worth just getting a depth gauge and measuring to make sure you're exactly 6mm. After that, I'm just going to use my jumper. Cloth would probably be better, just to make sure that is stuck down, because if this tape is not stuck to the drop channel, you'll find it very hard to fit a tyre. Next up, we are fitting the Chris King PT's valves. This is an 80mm long valve. Just using a sharp pick, we're going to make a hole for the valve here. You do not need to overthink this and start heating things up and melting it. Now, what I do really like about these wheels, they've got a flat area here for the little lock ring, because you're going to get a really good extra seal. So you've got a seal up here, but you've also got an additional seal down here. We are fitting the new Pirelli P0 Race RS in a 30mm. This is the recommended size. So rotation direction, line up your logos. What I'm doing here is just putting the tyre on the opposite side of the valve, because the valve is consuming the drop channel. So if I do it this way, I can then ease the bead onto the tyre a bit at a time. Right, I am going to go downstairs and use the tubeless sealant bucket and the compressor. Back in a second. There we go, just like that, back from the compressor and fully inflated. These went up super easy. Got them up at 70 PSI at the moment. Now, these are definitely a 30mm. You guys aren't going to believe me. So these wheels have blown a 30mm out to 32.5mm. We can't really look at the radial true anymore, so we'll remove the radial truing gauge off this, and let's get this in our truing stand and see where we are. Oh wow, that's made quite a significant difference actually. There's probably about 3 points difference on this, and I can tell that there's definitely more flex in these. Okay, so essentially now we do exactly the same thing, but we just do it with the tyre on. So what I'm doing now is making sure we're all at the right spoke tension. Generally speaking, just bringing all of these up by about 1/4 of a turn probably. I'm looking for sort of the loosest ones first. I'm working on those, trying to bring things up evenly and always looking at the true. And we are done. Now, I've built this up to the point where I'm pretty happy that every single number on this is about the same, up to that about 130 kilograms of force, reading a 15.5 on my gauge. Some of you more experienced wheel builders out there might notice that I'm not using the Park Tool wheel tension app. Great little app that corresponds with this tool, and it kind of visualizes everything. I might put a picture up on the screen for you. I think I've been doing this long enough that I just kind of keep that information in my head and I know what it is that I'm looking for. Sometimes I'll use it if I think the customer would benefit from seeing all those spoke calculations, but really confident with this. So the point where I've stopped is when I know that those spokes are definitely within that 5% variance of their tension, and I know that the left and right is now 0.2 millimeters and the dishing is all perfect. There's no real way of checking the radial anymore, but because I've only been making very small adjustments, like literally 1/4 of a turn, I don't think that radial would have gone out very much. And if I feel like I'm adjusting a couple of spokes very close to each other, I might go back and look at it, but that's unlikely at this stage. Anyway, I'm going to end this video by getting them on this bike and showing you guys how this looks actually fitted. Okay, now that I've got them all built up, what are my final thoughts? Well, I haven't ridden them yet, but I do plan to. Not these ones, these are going on a customer's bike. We've got another set we're building up that's going to go be part of a bigger custom build test featuring a very special Campagnolo group set, going on a very special bike. I wonder what that can be. Coming back to these, this is definitely the widest road bike wheel that I've ever built. It is mental to see a 25.5 millimeter internal on a road bike rim, but it does actually give a very nice profile to the tyre. I wasn't expecting that. I don't know what I was expecting, but it's weird seeing a 30mm blown out to 32mm like that. I do feel that if it wasn't for the serrated edges, it would look like a very fat wheel. It already looks like a big wheel. It looks like there's an awful lot of material there. And I feel like without the serrations, aerodynamics aside, I think it would just look wrong if there's sort of something there to make it look a little bit more svelte and road bike-like. It built up perfectly fine. The quality of the inside is what I'd expect from a wheel at this value. It's definitely not Princeton sort of quality in the slightest, but I've got no concerns over that at all. Now, in terms of price, these are built onto the 180 hubs, the most expensive hubs that DT Swiss do, and of course the most expensive spokes as well. And of course we've added those brass nipples. That doesn't add to the cost, but just means that it's not a stock item. So the entire cost of these was just over 1,500 quid and they weighed 1370. So I think that is on par. Probably a small upcharge for your local bike shop to build them, but not significant of what you would pay by the time you've done all your import duties if you'd brought them direct from Light Bicycle. And the main difference is that the main point of warranty is now with us. So they brought them from your local bike shop. We take responsibility for all the warranty like we would do according to the Consumer Rights Act. So yeah, down in the comments, what do you think? Or are you going to wait until we ride them and hold your judgment then? Okay, thanks for watching everybody. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please think about subscribing to the channel and be notified when we actually do the ride review. And yeah, I look forward to reading your comments. Take it easy.